this is funny because um, I know I've talked about this, or mentioned this title on the show, and I was like, did I talk about? I feel like I talked about this book already, um, and I'm scrolling through. No, I didn't. So I'm very excited to talk about this because this is a book I should have talked about by now because I read it a while ago. One of the OG books from AWA Studios is Grendel, Kentucky, written by Jeff McComsey, who also wrote The Fourth Man, which is an excellent book.
Oh, yeah.
Art by Tommy Lee Edwards, colors by Giovanna Nero, and letters by John Workman. So, synopsis: for 2 generations, the rural hill town of Grendel, Kentucky, has honored its Faustian bargain with the monster living in its abandoned coal mine. A human sacrifice every season in return for agrarian prosperity, the likes of which this rocky region had never before seen, including the greatest cash crop, the dankest weed in the land. When one town elder breaks this pact, Grendel's only hope is the prodigal daughter will return home to face the creature of her nightmares and bring her all female biker gang with her.
Hmm.
So, as I mentioned, this was one of the OG titles from AWA during their, when they first came out. I believe this came out September, and the Resistance dropped on March 13th, right? The start of the pandemic. So, it's only 4 issues, and it's a really, really, really quick read, which is fantastic because I'll talk about a little bit the pacing and the action in this book and the storytelling is just awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, when I was thinking about talking about this book and sort of I've done a lot of AWA books as you mentioned earlier, and one of the things I think I love most about AWA is unlike sort of the indie comic books, publishers that we read, you know what you're getting from AWA when you open up the first page, but an AWA book when you see it. Like Marvel has a certain aesthetic, right?
Hmm.
And DC has a certain aesthetic. The other publishers, not really, right? Like with Image, because it's so many creator
Yeah.
owned books, right? You're getting various art styles, various writing styles. I mean,
Sure.
most of the time they knock it out of the park, right? But you just like that at least if Image is going to put it out for the most part, you're getting quality stuff. But like, there's not like other than Spawn, right? There's not like that one thing where you go, "Oh yeah, this is an Image book. I can grab it off the rack." With if you strip away, the studio logos, like
Hmm.
oh, I'm getting an Image book, or oh, this is definitely a Boom book, or this is a Dark Horse book, or whatever. But AWA, you do. Part of that
Hmm.
is because they are so consistent with who they use for their covers, and their interior artists. They've got a small rotation of artists that they use for both, covers and interiors. So that definitely helps. But like, there's just a certain aesthetic and feel and grittiness when you read an AWA title. You just talked about, what's the book? The Black Tape, right?
Hmm.
But whether it's Black Tape, Archangel 8, American, whatever the book might be, right? You just look at it, you go, that's an AWA book. I fucking know it. And you read it and you're gonna love it. And so you get that with Grendel, Kentucky. Now, Tommy Lee Edwards is not an artist that I'm familiar with, and with all the AWA titles I've read, I believe this is the only book he's done.
Hmm.
Um, but he's got that feel, that sort of grittiness, that rawness to his art that fits a story like this perfectly. And we talked about Jeff McComsey. We both loved The Fourth Man. He's a great storyteller. He's a great crime storyteller, right? And with this is much more uh, of a horror book, which is great.
Ooh.
And so there was just a great cohesiveness between the artist and the writer here with this series, that I loved, and I think it really helped because they worked very well with each other. And I think it helped with the pacing when you're reading it because the art was, it fit the story so well, and vice versa, that bam, 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 bam. You just going through all 4 of those issues, like nothing. And so um, this book starts with its foot on the gas, Nick, and never lets up. There's not a moment where there's a lull or there's a bridge or there's a gap in the action. It's 100 miles an hour right from the rip, and I fucking love that. And it manages to tell sort of a very Shakespearean type story, but with gore and violence out the ass. Like, it's just, again, the art, I think, is such a great component to this story, because you just, the visual, everything just fits together, so perfectly. And one of the other things I loved about this is that there's no real good guys, in this book. Like,
Nice.
none of the characters are saints. Okay, like I talked about, like, these guys are, growing and selling, selling drugs, right? And it makes a town very prosperous. And human sacrifice has to be made, once a year. So, like, they're not like they're not really good guys, but you're still just about rooting for all of them, right? Which I thought was a great dynamic, because I've talked about how I love flawed characters, especially when it comes to like detectives and things like that. But like, I love a good flawed character, and it's not necessarily that these characters are flawed, but they're not saints, right? And so it was an interesting little twist there that I enjoyed. There's one character like, yeah, you're a bit of a prick, but you're not like, oh, I detest, like, the main villain is sort of, a monstrous sort of being, right? That that's sort of part of the town, itself. So the characters you get in this book, you have Clyde, who you're introduced to right from the first page, and it's his death that happens right off the rip, that sort of this whole story is sort of revolved around. And it's what sort of brings some estranged members of the family back to the town of Grendel, Kentucky. And then all the shit that happens afterward is sort of a chain reaction to the event that he sort of started right off the beginning of this book. And what's great about the storytelling too is that, you sort of you get this thing that happens. You don't know exactly what happens, other than, this character dies, and then all the layers and all the stuff that unfolds after that, and how sort of McComsey pieces it together, and comes together at the end, was just, it was a really great way of sort of telling the story. And then you have his two kids. You have, Denny, who's Clyde's son. He's sort of the new pot kingpin of Grendel, but again, like, he's not a saint, but deep down he's a good dude, right? He's trying to do the right thing, sort of like his dad, when you find out, was trying in the end to right some wrongs that happened in the past. And then again, one of the other things that AWA does really well that I love is that they have some of the most badass female characters put on comic book pages. And we get that with Marnie, who is Clyde's adopted daughter. And again, you don't fuck with Marnie. She's a badass broad, and she's, the leader of a biker game known as the Harlots, and they're not to be messed with either, right? And they're a very vicious, a very violent crew. And it's sort of Marnie's story that it really is the greatness of this book. And when her story sort of, when it comes full circle at the end, and it's all sort of put together, the story itself is really good. But it's her story in particular, and how everything sort of unfolded, and sort of the twist that comes. You go, man, that was awesome. That is what sort of elevates this book sort of, next level. And then you get Pap, who is, the grandfather. He's the one that started all of this from the get-go, and learning of his backstory is a really intriguing part. And he's the guy that's sort of like, oh yeah, he's a bit of a, but he's not a bad, yeah, but he's not a bad guy, right? But he's not like
he's just a piece of shit.
Yes, exactly.
Like back hair, white jeans.
Exactly, right? But again, his backstory was really good too. So like, all these little things just all add up, and is excellent. And then you sort of get the town of Grendel, Kentucky itself, right? And the secrets that it harbors is really horrific. And this is what when I was reading this book, one of the first things I thought to myself was, I'm getting Red Fork vibes here. And
That's what it
part of
sounds like
that,
when
right?
I heard you talk about
Part
it.
of
Yeah.
that, is the art, and there's some similarities, sort of with the mines, and so it's not quite like this giant allegory of addiction like Red Fork is.
Hmm.
This is definitely more of a sort of a bit of a monster story, horror story. I mean, not that Red Fork isn't, but like there's no
I get what you
like
mean.
yeah, there's no subtle metaphors here. It sort of is, it is what it is. It's just a great, story. But man, like the art, I can't get over the art, right? Just how well Tommy Lee Edwards sort of brings some of these things, to life. And it's just excellent storytelling all around. This is right in the upper echelon of AWA books. I recommend this to anyone, especially people like when I say horror, like it's not like your macabre horror story, but it's definitely more of that monster kind of horror story.
Mm.
And there's some violence and some viciousness that take place, man. Like I said, it is 100 miles an hour right from the rip. You fly, you could read all 4 issues, like that, and go, damn, that was a good story.
I'll tell you what, I definitely saw this book later than, like later on, not when it first came out. I remember seeing the art for it, and I didn't realize, oh, is this a book that's ongoing, coming out, whatever. But I talked to you about it, and you had said you had read it, so you were going to talk about it on the show. So I have been waiting to hear from you on this one. I obviously expected it to be awesome, so I'm very glad to hear that. But yeah, like I was like as I'm listening to this, and like there's like obviously differences, but it did remind me of Red Fork kind of right off of the rip.
It was absolutely fantastic. This is just yet another law, another title from AWA that I'm going to tell people to read until I'm blue in the face. It's absolutely
Mhm.
excellent.